The first alarm wasn't the one that froze the room. It was the second. A sharp, mechanical tone cut through the operating theater at Massachusetts General Hospital, clean, precise, impossible to ignore. Monitors pulsed. Gloved hands paused mid-motion. Someone whispered a curse under their breath. Dr. Julian Vane didn't look up right away. He was already inside the work, already navigating the narrow margin between survival and loss. The patient on the table, identified only as Leo, male, mid-20s, traffic collision, had lost more blood than the chart admitted. Trauma surgery was always a race against time, but this felt different. He could feel it in the room. The air was too tight, too quiet. Type and cross-match? Julian asked, his voice steady, practiced. The lab technician stared at the screen, then stared again. I need to rerun this. Julian finally looked up. The monitor flashed red. Not metaphorically, literally red. A warning banner pulsed across the display, accompanied by a sound no one in that room had ever heard before. No? For half a second, no one spoke. No wasn't rare. Rare things happened every day in medicine. This was something else entirely. Fewer than 50 known cases in the world. Blood without any antigens. Compatible with almost no one. Dependent on donors who often didn't exist when you needed them most. Someone broke the silence. We don't have that in the bank. Another voice, tighter now. We can't wait for international transport. He won't last an hour. Julian felt the floor tilt just slightly, just enough, because he knew exactly what the screen meant. Because 20 years ago, during a routine exam meant for research and never meant to matter again, his own blood had triggered the same alarm. Because Boston didn't have a registry for this kind of donor. Because, at this exact moment, he was the only person in the city who could keep this young man alive. Hospital protocol screamed inside his head. Ethics, boundaries, distance. But none of it moved his hands as he stripped off one glove and reached for the consent form. Prep me, Julian said. A nurse hesitated. Doctor, I know, he replied. Document everything. The irony wasn't lost on him as the needle slid in. A surgeon trained to cut now offering himself as supply. As the transfusion began, a thin line of dark red flowed from Julian's arm into the bag, then under into Leo. Blood to blood, life to life. Julian watched the bag, not the monitors. Watched the level drop. Watched something invisible but irreversible take shape between them. What he didn't see, what no one in the room could have predicted, was that this wasn't just a transfusion. It was a reconnection. Because as Leo's vitals stabilized, as the alarm softened into rhythmic beeps, Julian felt a question surface that had no place in an operating room. Why him? Out of millions? Out of decades? Why now? Later, the hospital would praise the decision. Headlines would call it heroism, a miracle of modern medicine. A textbook case. But standing there, like glaring down, blood still warm in the tubing, Julian Vane felt something colder than fear settle in his chest. What if saving this life meant losing the one he'd built? And more dangerously, what if the truth flowing between them had been waiting 20 years to be acknowledged? If a single drop of blood can connect to strangers forever, what would happen when the past finally demanded its name? Would you risk your career, your family, your carefully protected identity for a child who never knew existed? The next morning, the hospital looked almost peaceful, at least from the outside. Inside, every hallway carried the aftertaste of last night's emergency. The whispered retellings, the clipped congratulations, the kind of admiration that feels warm until you realize it can also become a weapon. Julian Vane walked through it all like a man wearing a suit that no longer fit. He should have felt proud. The surgery had worked. Leo was stable. The transfusion, Julian's transfusion, had bought the young man time. The press office would spin it into a triumph of leadership. The board would love it. The donors would love it. And yet Julian couldn't shake the sensation that he'd stepped onto a track already in motion, only that didn't end where he wanted. He paused outside Leo's ICU room. Through the glass, the young man lay still beneath a thin blanket, a ventilator whispering like a tide. His face was bruised, but not unrecognizable. There was something about his features and angle, a tension in the breath that tugged at Julian's memory like a thread caught on a nail. Julian pushed the thought away. Confirmation bias, he told himself. Adrenaline, guilt, stress, asterisk doctors saw patterns where they shouldn't. That was how paranoia started. He entered anyway. A nurse adjusted an IV line and nodded respectfully. He's a fighter. Julian forced a faint smile. So am I. He stepped closer, checking the chart, scanning vitals, doing what he always did, anchoring himself in numbers because emotions were unreliable. Then his eyes drifted to Leah's shoulder, exposed where the hospital gown had slipped. That's when he saw it. A birthmark, not a vague blotch, not a common crescent. This was sharp and unmistakable, like a small wing, angled upward, as if the skin itself had been branded by a careful hand. Julian went still. He had seen that mark before. Not on Leo, on his own father, on his aunt, on a framed photograph tucked away in an old family album that no one spoke about anymore. The vein birthmark, a trait so oddly specific, relatives joked it was their family crest, as if nature had signed them in ink. Julian had never taken it seriously until now. His mouth went dry. He felt his pulse climb, not with panic, but with a kind of dread so quiet it masqueraded as clarity. The nurse noticed his expression. Doctor, are you okay? Julian blinked, smoothing his features into something professional. I'm fine. Just long night? He took a breath, then asked casually, do we have any family listed? The nurse checked the file. Only an emergency contact. A woman named Elena listed as mother. She hasn't answered calls yet. The name hit him like a door slamming shut. Elena? Julian's hand tightened around the edge of the bed rail. There were many Elenas in the world. It could mean nothing. But his mind, traitorous and fast, dragged up the one Elena he had spent 2 decades burying. Elena Mare, seamstress, immigrant, soft-spoken until she wasn't. A woman who looked at him once like she believed he could be better than the men his family expected him to become. A woman who vanished. Julian left the room too quickly, walking with the briskness of someone who knew where he was going when in truth, he was simply trying to outrun the memory. In his office, he locked the door. Then he did the thing he had sworn implicitly, ethically, Leo would never do. He opened Leo's electronic medical record. Not for treatment, not for necessity, for curiosity, for truth. The screen offered him dates, identifiers, insurance forms. Each click felt like crossing a line in fresh snow, footprints that could not be erased. He knew the consequences. HIPAA was a suggestion. It was the backbone of trust. A violation could cost him his license, his career, his reputation. And still his fingers moved. He didn't order a DNA test. He didn't request genetics. He didn't do anything so blatant. Instead, he searched for small things. Blood type history, prior hospital visits, allergies, vaccination, records, anything that might quietly confirm what his heart was already screaming. Then he found it. A skin pediatric document from years ago, faded, slightly crooked, uploaded from an old clinic, under notable features, a note birthmark resembling wing right shoulder. Julian stared at it until the words blurred. He leaned back slowly, as if the chair might collapse under the weight of what he'd just learned. This wasn't proof. Not legally, not scientifically, but it was enough to open the door he'd spent 20 years bricking shut. A knock interrupted him. He minimized the screen instantly. Dr. Vane? A resident's voice. The board wants a briefing later. They're calling last night historic. Julian swallowed. Tell them they'll be there. The resident hesitated. Also, your wife called. She asked if you'd be home for dinner. She sounded intense. Julian's throat tightened again, this time for a different reason. Claire. He pictured her perfectly composed face, her voice like polished steel. Claire didn't ask questions unless she already knew the answers. And she didn't miss patterns, especially not ones that threatened her. Julian waited until the footsteps faded. Then he turned back to the screen, to the hidden record, to the wing-shaped mark that had detonated his past. He thought of Leo's body on the table, of his own blood entering a stranger, and of the curse that came with secrets. They don't stay buried. They only wait for the right moment to rise. Julian whispered to the empty room, barely audible, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Who are you to me? And somewhere down the hall, behind glass and humming machines, Leo the knife that was what he well slept on, unaware that the blood saving his life had also awakened a war that would reach far beyond the hospital walls. Claire Vane did not come home to celebrate. At precisely 7:12 p.m., she dismissed her driver, stepped out of the elevator on the 43rd floor, and walked into her private office overlooking the Charles River. The city below shimmered obedient, orderly, predictable. Claire appreciated cities for that. They responded to structure, to pressure, to leverage. People did not. She placed her handbag on the glass desk, removed her coat, and turned on only one lamp. The room glowed in controlled shutouts, the kind that made confessions easier and mistakes more visible. On her tablet, notifications stacked neatly. Hospital board congratulates Dr. Julian Vane. Rare blood transfusion saves young man's life. Medical ethics panel praises leadership. Claire read them all without expression. Julian had always been praised, like the celebrated for his hands, his steadiness, his ability to be heroic without appearing emotional. It was part of why he'd been chosen, not just as a husband, but as an asset. A man whose reputation could withstand scrutiny. Tonight, though, something felt off. Claire opened a secure folder marked Vane Family Trust. Then another, Hospital Risk Internal. She did not search for gossip. She searched for patterns. The name Leo appeared again, not in press, not in public statements, but buried in internal extenuating discrepancies. Access records of blood bank override authorized personally by Julian. Claire leaned back slightly. Doctors bent rules all the time. Good ones did it quietly. But Julian was careless. He was meticulous to the point of obsession. For him to step outside protocol, there had to be a reason. And reasons, Claire knew, were always human. She pulled up the medical film at the contents, just the metadata. Accessed by Dr. Julian Vane. Time, 6:14, and purpose, unspecified. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Unspecified meant indefensible. Claire tapped her pen once against the desk, then twice. She didn't feel jealousy. That emotion belonged to people who feared replacement. What she felt was something colder, threat assessment. She reached for another document, the state map, properties, endowments, equity shares, education trusts, and at the center, the future she had engineered with surgical precision. Their daughter, insulated from chaos, protected from scandal, destined to inherit not just wealth but legitimacy. Claire whispered to the empty room, calm and controlled. "Who are you?" She didn't need the answer yet. She needed context. Within minutes, she was on a secure line. "I want a background trace," she said. "Female name likely connected to the patient. Elena, that's all I have." A pause. Then yes, quietly. "No digital footprints." She ended the call and stood, walking toward the window. Outside, the hospital lights glowed in the distance. Julian's domain, a place governed by ethics committees and peer review. How quaint. Claire's world had fewer illusions. In law, truth was flexible. Timing was not. Her phone buzzed. A message from Julian, running late, surgery follow-ups. "I'll explain later." Claire smiled faintly. There were only two kinds of explanations people offered later, the kind they rehearsed and the kind they avoided. She typed back, "Of course. Take care of your patient." Patient, not son, not problem, not inheritance risk. Yet, an hour later, Claire sat alone at the dining table and touched meal cooling in porcelain silence. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't pour wine. She waited. When the door finally opened, Julian looked exhausted. He loosened, shoulders heavy, eyes carrying something he learned to hide. Claire stood, crossed the room, and kissed his cheek. Polite, public-facing. "Congratulations," she said softly. "You saved a life?" Julian nodded. "It was complicated." Claire gestured toward the table. "So is marriage." "Sit." They did. For a moment, neither spoke. Claire studied him the way jurors studied witness watching for what didn't align. Finally, she reached into her folder and slid a single document across the table. It wasn't an accusation. It was a map, assets, bloodlines, consequences. Julian's eyes dropped to it, then lifted slowly. Claire met his gaze, voice even, almost gentle. Julian, she said, tell me something. She paused on it for drama, but for precision. Did you give blood last night to save a stranger? Her finger rested lightly on the page. Or did you just transfer our daughter's inheritance to someone you never planned to acknowledge? The question hung between them, sharper than any scalpel. And in that silence, Julian understood something devastatingly clear. The operating room had been the easy part. This was the real trial. By sunrise, 2 investigations were already moving through Boston quite fast and aimed at the same woman. Claire Vane didn't chase truth like a person chasing closure. She chased it like a prosecutor chasing leverage. At 8:03 a.m., she sat at her office desk, a cup of coffee untouched, and opened a new file with a single typed word at the top, Elena. Across the city, Julian Vane sat in his hospital office with the door locked, staring at his own hands as if they belonged to someone else. The same hands that had repaired a shattered spleen and stopped internal bleeding had also some hope in a wound inside him that no sutures could close. 2 hunts, 2 motives, 1 target. Claire's private investigator arrived first. He was the kind of man who didn't waste language. A former police detective, now paid to find what people tried to bury. He set a thin folder on Claire's desk and spoke without sitting. Elena Maris, 46. Works cash jobs. Small alterations, shop in Dorchester. 1 son Leo. No father listed on the original birth certificate copy I pulled. Claire's face didn't change, but something in her eyes sharpened, like a lens focusing. No father listed, she repeated. The investigator nodded. There are traces, though. Medical clinic records from 20 years ago. A pregnancy intake form. It's incomplete, but it suggests she was pressured to leave town at the time. By whom? Claire asked. The men hesitated. That part isn't written, but the clinic was in an area your family used to support. Charitable funding? The Vane name appears on the donor plaque. Claire's fingers stilled on her pen, so it had been circling their family all along, hiding in plain sight. Find her, Claire said, before my husband does. The investigator didn't blink. You think he doesn't know already? Claire's gaze lifted, calm as ice. If he knew, he would have told me. Julian is many things. He is not reckless. Across the city, Julian was being reckless in the only way that mattered. He left the hospital without telling anyone where he was going. No driver, no entourage, just him, in a plain coat, taking side streets like a man who didn't want to be followed yet didn't quite believe he deserved to arrive unnoticed. Dorchester felt like another country compared to the world Claire lived in. The streets were narrower, the storefronts smaller. The air carried the smell of fried food, bus exhaust, and something faintly metallic from old winter pipes. People moved with purpose, but not with comfort. They didn't assume safety. They earned it day by day. Julian parked blocks away and walked. He found the shop because it was the only one with a hand-painted sign. Mare's alterations, same-day repairs. The window display held mannequins in half-finished dresses, pens glinting like tiny warnings. Inside, the hum of a sewing machine ran steady as a heartbeat. Julian stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. He had rehearsed this meeting for 20 years in nightmares and daydreams, but no version prepared him for the simple fact that Elena might look at him and feel nothing at all. He pushed the door open. A bell chimed. The sewing machine stopped. Elena looked up from behind the counter. Her hair was pulled back, threaded with silver now. Her face had the same structure he remembered, but the softness was gone replaced by the kind of hardness that comes from raising a life alone. She stared at him, not confused, not surprised, as if she'd known this day would come, eventually. Julian's throat tightened. Elena, her expression didn't flicker. Dr. Vane? The title sounded like an insult in her mouth. He took a step forward. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't. Elena lifted a hand, palm outward. Stop. Don't, she said quietly. If you didn't know, it's because you didn't ask. The words landed with an awful, surgical precision. Julian glanced around the shop at the cramped space, the worn floor, the stacks of fabric. A world built from endurance, not entitlement. Elena, he said again, softer now. Leo is in my hospital. As I know, she cut in. And for the first time, something flashed in her eyes in panic, not something like fury held on a leash. You think I didn't recognize your name when they called? You think I didn't hear the headlines this morning? Julian swallowed. Is he my? Elena's laugh was short, humorless. Say it. If you're brave enough, say the word. Julian's lips parted, but before he could speak, the bell chimed again behind him. Another person entered the shop. Julian turned instinctively and saw a man he didn't recognize, standing just inside the doorway, scanning the room the way professionals did. The private investigator. Claire had arrived without ever stepping inside. And suddenly, Julian understood. This wasn't just a reunion, it was a race. And he was already behind. The men in the doorway didn't speak. He didn't need to. His posture said paid. His eyes said trained. And the way he let the door swing shut behind him said something even clearer. You've been found. Julian's first instinct was to shield Ellen on absurd impulse, considering he was the one who had brought danger back to her doorstep. Elena didn't move, didn't flinch. She simply turned her gaze from Julian to the stranger and back again, like she was watching the storms argue over who deserved to destroy her life. Julian stepped between them. Who are you? The investigator's expression remained neutral. Just looking for a tailor. Elena's mouth tightened. There are 3 tailors within 2 blocks. The man's eyes flicked a fraction too quick, toward the counter toward Elena's name stitched on a small fabric tag. He realized too late he'd been read. Julian felt his stomach drop. Claire sent you. The investigator didn't confirm it, didn't deny it. He merely shrugged with the elegance of someone who believed privacy was a commodity. Mom, he said to Elena, still calm, I'd like to talk. Off the record. Elena's laugh came again, small, razor thin. Off the record? That's funny. My whole life has been off the record. Julian turned toward her, voice low, urgent. Elena, please. We? She repeated as if tasting the word. You don't get to say we? Not after you let your mother decide whether my child deserved a father. The sentence hit him so hard he couldn't pretend to misunderstand. Julian's face drained of color. My mother? Elena's eyes held his without mercy. You never wondered why I disappeared. You never asked. Not once. Because your life was comfortable enough without answers. Julian's throat worked. That's not true. Elena reached under the counter and pulled out an old envelope, creased, yellowed, the edges softened by years of being handled and hated and kept anyway. She slapped it onto the glass. Julian stared at it as if it might burn him. On the front, his name, Julian Van, written in Elena's handwriting. Unopened. He lifted it slowly, like a surgeon lifting something delicate from a body. His fingers trembled. I wrote that, Elena said. The day I found out I was pregnant. I wrote it before your mother came to my apartment. Julian looked up sharply. She came to you? Elena nodded once. She came with a smile and a checkbook, like she was doing me a favor. The investigator shifted his weight, uncomfortable now. He wasn't supposed to witness this kind of truth. His job was evidence, not soul. Elena continued, voice steady but brittle. She told me you were destined for something bigger, that I was a distraction, that if I cared about you, I would vanish. Julian's lips parted. No. She offered money? Elena said, eyes unblinking. Enough to change my life if I agreed never to contact you. Never to show up? Never to ruin the vain name. Julian shook his head, slowly, like a man watching his own foundation crack. Why didn't you tell me? After. Elena's expression hardened. I tried. She tapped the envelope. I mailed it. It came back. Undeliverable. Your mother had already rerouted your mail? Already built walls? Julian swallowed. Elena, I swear I didn't know. Elena stepped closer, and for the first time, her control wavered not into tears, but into something fiercer, the rage of a woman who had carried an entire truth alone. You didn't know? She echoed, because not knowing was convenient. Julian's voice broke slightly. Leo, is he my son? Elena didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The answer lived in the shape of Leo's face, in the wing-shaped birthmark, in the impossible blood type now running through Julian's own veins like a curse and a prayer at once. But Elena still made him earn the word. Yes, she said finally. Yes, yours? Julian's breath caught. The world didn't explode. No dramatic collapse. Just a quiet, internal devastation, the kind that rearranges you forever. Julian tried to speak, but Elena raised her hand again, the same stop gesture as before. Don't, she said. Don't say you're sorry. Don't say you want to fix it. You want to know what you did? Julian's eyes filled, but he didn't look away. Elena leaned in, voice low enough that the investigator couldn't pretend he didn't hear. You saved him with your blood, she said. You stood in a spotless operating room and played hero. Her gaze sharpened like a needle threading fabric. But 20 years ago, you killed him with your silence. Julian flinched as if struck. Elena straightened, breath controlled again. I raised him without your money, without your name, without your protection, and he became good. She glanced toward the back room where a small framed photo sat on a shelf, Leo in a graduation cap, smiling like someone who had fought for every inch of joy. Don't you dare walk in now, Elena whispered, and act like you're a gift. The investigator cleared his throat softly, trying to regain control of the situation. Ms. Maris, there may be options here. Agreements? Protections? Elena turned to him like a flame turning toward oxygen. Options, she said. You mean bribes? Julian's head snapped toward the investigator. Get out? The man raised a hand, placating. Doctor, I'm not here to escalate. I'm here to prevent a scandal. Julian stepped closer, voice deadly quiet. You're here to threaten her. Leave. Now. The investigator held Julian's stare, then gave the smallest nod and backed toward the door. As the bell chimed and the door shut, the shop fell silent again except for the faint hum of a refrigerator and Julian's uneven breathing. He looked at Elena, voice raw. What do you want from me? Elena didn't hesitate. I want you to do what you should have done 20 years ago, she said. Tell the truth without hiding behind your mother, your hospital, or your wife. Julian's shoulders sagged. Claire will destroy me. Elena's eyes were flat. Good. Then she pointed toward the door. And now, she said, go back to your perfect life, before you break what little peace we managed to build. Julian stood there, holding an unopened letter from a younger Elena, feeling the weight of a son asleep in his hospital and the certainty that Claire had already moved her pieces onto the board. Because in Claire's world, blood wasn't just medicine. It was inheritance. And wars were fought over less. Elena expected the next knock to be Julian again. Instead, it came 3 days later, sharp, punctual, impossible to ignore. By then, Leo was awake. His eyes clear, steady, too old for his age, had skinned the ACU room as if he was cataloging exits. He listened more than he spoke. He thanked nurses with a gentleness that suggested he had grown up learning not to ask for too much. Julian visited once a day, always with a reason that sounded clinical. Post-op check, hemoglobin trend, discharge planning. He never said son, never said family. The words seemed to burn his tongue from the inside. And Elena never came. Not because she didn't care, because she was afraid that if Leo saw Julian's face too close too often, he might start to imagine a life that had never been offered. And Elena couldn't bear to watch her child discover longing like a new injury. Then Claire made her move. The invitation arrived by courier, heavy paper, elegant type, the kind of envelope that made poor people instinctively suspicious. Claire Vane, Esquire requests your presence for private consultation. Elena read it once, then twice. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Still, she went, not because she wanted anything from Claire, but because refusing would mean letting Claire define the rules. Claire's law office was nothing like Elena's shop. Marble floors, quiet air, a receptionist who smiled as if smiling was part of the architecture. Elena's boots sounded too loud. Her coat looked too worn. The contrast wasn't accidental. It was theater. Claire Vane stood as Elena entered, dressed in charcoal gray, hair immaculate, eyes calm. She offered a handshake, professional, not warm. Ms. Maris, she said. Thank you for coming. Elena did not sit until Claire sat first. There was a moment, small but significant, when Elena realized, this woman expects me to feel smaller here. Elena folded her hands and waited. Claire placed a single folder on the table between them. I won't waste your time, she said. We both know why we're here. Elena's voice was flat. Do we? Claire opened the folder slowly, like a judge revealing an exhibit. Inside, a contract, a non-disclosure agreement, thick, detailed, clauses stacked like bricks. A document designed not merely to silence someone, but to keep them locked inside their own silence forever. Claire slid it forward with a pen. "Elena," she said, voice surprisingly soft, "you have raised Leo with dignity. That's clear? I respect that." Elena stared at the paper. "You respect me." Claire's gaze didn't waver. "I respect outcomes." Then she turned one page and revealed the number, printed cleanly at the bottom like a final verdict, $5 million. Elena's breath caught just once. Not because the money tempted her, but because it insulted her. Because it proved Claire believed everything had a price, including motherhood. Claire watched her carefully. "This is not hush money," she said. "It's security. For Leo. For you. A settlement that allows your life to remain intact." Elena's fingers tightened. "My life is intact because I held it together." Claire nodded as if acknowledging a fact in court. "And I'm offering to keep it from being dismantled." Elena finally looked up. "By you." Claire didn't deny it. "Let's be honest," Claire said, tone calm, precise. "If Julian publicly claims Leo as his son, the hospital will investigate how he accessed Leo's information. If he used his position to confirm paternity without consent, that's a violation. Possibly a career-ending one." Elena's eyes narrowed. "So this is about protecting your husband?" "This is about protecting everyone," Claire corrected. "Including your son." She leaned forward slightly. "Leo is alive today because Julian's blood saved him," Claire said. "The press already knows that. If the public discovers a personal connection, they won't call it heroic. They'll call it compromised." Elena stayed quiet, forcing Claire to keep talking. "People revealed more when they tried to justify themselves." Claire continued, voice sharpening. "Our daughter's future is tied to Julian's position. Scholarships, board seats, legacy programs, things you may not care about, but which will disappear if scandal touches our family name." Elena's mouth tightened. "And what about Leo's future?" Claire spread her hands slightly, a gesture that looked generous. "This agreement protects it. He gets money, education, stability." "Quiet?" Elena laughed, low and bitter. "Quiet? That's what your family always buys?" Claire's eyes flickered annoyance, quickly controlled. "This is not a threat, Elena. It's reality." Elena stared at the contract again. Pages of silence, purchased and enforced. She thought of Leo, awake in that hospital bed, refusing pity even from nurses. She looked back up at Claire. "You want me to pretend he doesn't exist?" "No," Claire said. "I want you to keep him safe from a war he didn't choose." Elena's voice turned sharp. "A war you started." Claire inhaled, steadying herself. When she spoke again, her words were clean as legal code. "I didn't start it," she said. "I inherited it. I married into a family built on reputation, and I will not allow 20-year-old secrets to burn down what protects my child." There it was. Not jealousy, not heartbreak. A mother's defense gold, strategic, ruthless. Elena sat back, studying Claire like she was examining a garment seam, searching for weak stitching. "And what happens?" Elena asked slowly. "If I don't sign?" Claire's smile was polite. "If you don't sign," she said, "you lose control of the narrative. Julian will act on emotion, and I will act on law." Elena's pulse steadied, not raced. She had lived too long without safety nets to be frightened by threats disguised as courtesy. She reached forward, took the pen and placed it down beside the contract. Then she pushed the folder back toward Claire. "Keep your money," Elena said quietly. "Leo isn't your problem to manage." Claire's eyes hardened. "Then you're choosing chaos." Elena rose, pulling on her coat. "No," she said. "I'm choosing truth." As Elena walked out, her footsteps echoed on marble, too loud, too real. And behind her, Claire Vane sat perfectly still, staring at the unsigned contract as if it were a chessboard. Because now, courtesy was over, and the next move would not be offered. It would be forced. That night, the Vane house felt less like a home and more like a courtroom after exquisite, expensive, and filled with things that had never been chosen for comfort. Julian arrived late, not because he was operating, because he had been sitting in his car 3 blocks away, hands on the steering wheel, rehearsing every version of the truth that might keep him alive. When he finally stepped inside, the foyer lights were low. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and cold stone. No music, no television, no signs of their daughter. Only silence arranged the way Claire arranged everything, intentionally. He hung his coat, turned and saw Claire at the dining table, one lamp glowing beside her like an interrogation light. Two folders lay in front of her, one thin, one thick. A glass of water. No wine. Julian's stomach tightened. Claire looked up, expression composed. Sit. Julian didn't move. Claire repeated, softer but firmer. Julian, sit. He sat. For a moment, she studied him without speaking. Not like a wife waiting for an apology, like an attorney deciding which question would make him contradict himself first. Julian broke the silence. You met Elena. Claire's eyes didn't blink. Yes. And you offered her money? I offered her protection, Claire corrected. Julian's voice rose before he could stop it. Protection from what? From me? Claire tilted her head. From what you've already done. Julian's jaw tightened. I saved Leo's life. Claire's gaze sharpened. You saved him with your blood, then you endangered him with your choices. She opened the thick folder and slid it across the table. Julian didn't touch it yet, but he saw the heading on the first page and felt cold bloom in his chest. Internal Compliance Report, Potential HIPAA Breach. His breath caught. What is this? Claire's voice remained even. It's what happens when you access patient records without a documented medical need. Julian swallowed. I'm his surgeon. Were you accessing the record for care, Claire asked, or for confirmation? Julian stared at her. The question was surgical, designed to cut cleanly through excuses. I needed to know about his transfusion history, Julian said carefully. Claire's eyebrows lifted just slightly. Interesting, because the access timestamp was 6:14 a.m. after the transfusion was complete, and there is no note in the chart explaining why you opened the file. Julian's throat tightened. Claire, she held up a hand, not a stop gesture like Helena's. This was different. This was control. Julian, Claire said, I'm going to tell you exactly what your situation is without emotion, because emotion is what got you here. She tapped the folder lightly. If the hospital investigates this properly, they will audit your access history. They will request justification for every click. They will interview staff. They will ask why a chief surgeon personally authorized an override and then reviewed metadata unrelated to immediate treatment. Julian's voice was strained. You're threatening me. Claire's gaze locked onto his. No, I'm describing reality. She closed the folder and placed her hands flat on the table. No, she said quietly. Here's the choice you actually have. Julian's pulse thudded in his ears. Claire continued, voice smooth as a closing argument. You will not claim Leo publicly. Julian's mouth opened. You can, Claire cut in. You will continue to treat him professionally until he is discharged. Then you will transfer his care to another attending physician. You will have no further contact outside of what is medically necessary. Julian's face tightened, pain flickering through the mask. Is my son? Claire's eyes didn't soften. He's Elena's son, and he is a liability to our family if you decide to make him yours now. Julian pushed back from the table slightly, as if the words were physically heavy. You're talking about him like a lawsuit. Claire leaned in, because lawsuits are what happen when people think love exempts them from rules. Julian's voice dropped, desperate. What do you want me to do? Pretend he doesn't exist. Claire's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Julian stared at her, stunned not by cruelty, but by the certainty. Claire was improvising. She had decided. He whispered, how can you ask me that? Claire's eyes flashed, then just for a moment, something rose beneath the polish. Because, she said, I've spent 20 years building a life with you that doesn't collapse the moment a secret shows up at our doorstep. She reached into the thin folder now and pulled out one sheet of paper. A letterhead, a formal draft, the kind of document people thought only existed in movies until it arrived on their table. Complaint, professional misconduct, and ethics violation. Julian's breath stopped. Claire slid it toward him, as she said, is what I will file if you force my hand. Julian's hands trembled slightly as he read the first lines. Abuse of authority, improper access, conflict of interest. The words weren't dramatic. They were devastating because they were plausible. He looked up, eyes glossy. You would do that to me? Claire's voice stayed low, controlled. You're asking me to do something to Julian. You're asking me to let our daughter become collateral damage to your guilt. Julian's voice broke. This is guilt. This is responsibility. Claire's expression hardened again. Responsibility would have been telling me the truth the moment you suspected. Responsibility would have been staying within ethical boundaries. Responsibility would have been not dragging us into a scandal that will follow our child for the rest of her life. Julian sat very still, the way he did before making an incision. Then he asked, barely audible, "Do you love me at all?" Claire's gaze held his. "I love the life we built," she said. "And I love our daughter enough to protect her from your impulses." The sentence landed like a verdict. Julian stared down at the complaint. He imagined the hospital board faces that had applauded him yesterday turning cold, turning legal. He imagined reporters asking about the famous surgeon who broke patient privacy for personal reasons. He imagined his daughter at school, overhearing whispers. And then, behind all that, imagined Leo, alone, waking up to discover the truth, and being told it wasn't worth claiming. Julian looked up again, voice quiet, strained. "So that's it," he said. "Your ultimatum." Claire nodded once. "Choose," she said. "The father you want to become or the life you already have." And in the silence that followed, Julian realized something terrifying. For the first time in his marriage, Claire wasn't negotiating. She was preparing to win. Julian didn't sleep. He sat in the study with the complaint letter still on the desk, and touched like a live wire. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Leo on the operating table, husk and pale under surgical light, heart rate slipping, the monitor begging for a miracle. And every time he opened them again, he saw Claire's face calm, certain, already drafting the ending. At 4:38 a.m., Julian finally gave up on pretending rest was possible. He showered, dressed, and drove back to the hospital before dawn, moving through the empty streets like a man sneaking into his own life. By the time he reached the ICU, morning had begun to stir. Nurses changed shifts. Coffee cups appeared. The hospital returned to its rhythm machines humming, voices low, lips balancing on numbers. Leo had been moved from ICU overnight to a step-down unit. He was improving fast. Julian stood outside the room, hand hovering near the door handle, and realized he was afraid. Not of losing his job, of hearing his son speak. He pushed the door open. Leo was awake, sitting upright, color returning to his face. He was thinner than Julian expected, but there was a steadiness to him that didn't come from medicine. It came from having survived things no chart would ever record. Leo looked up as Julian entered. His gaze didn't brighten with gratitude. It sharpened with attention. "Dr. Vane," Leo said. "You're early?" Julian forced a small smile. "How are you feeling?" Leo's eyes flicked to Julian's arm, where the faint bruise from the transfusion still lingered like a watermark. "Alive," he said simply. "Apparently, because of you." Julian's throat tightened. He nodded, checking the monitor as if he needed data to keep his hands steady. Leo spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" Julian looked at him. "Of course." Leo's voice was come to calm. "How rare is no?" Julian paused. "Extremely. It's one of the rarest blood types on Earth." Leo nodded slowly, processing. "Then, and you have it too." The statement wasn't a question. Julian felt his chest constrict. "Yes." Leo watched him carefully, as if weighing every reaction. "So that's why you donated?" Julian tried to keep it clinical. "It was medically necessary." Leo's mouth twitched and not quite a smile. More like recognition. "Right," Leo said. "Medically necessary?" Julian's pulse picked up. But Leo lifted a hand. Not Elena's gesture. Not Claire's. It was his own, quiet, steady, asking for space. "I heard you last night," Leo said. Julian froze. Leo continued, voice even. "I wasn't supposed to." "I know. People think patients don't hear when they're half sedated. But I did." Julian's voice came out rough. "You heard what?" Leo's eyes held his. I heard an argument. I heard someone say my name like it was a problem that needed to be contained. I heard someone say you accessed my records. Julian swallowed. It's complicated. Leo tilted his head slightly. Complicated is what adults say when they want to keep control. Julian stared at him, stunned by the precision. Leo looked down for a moment, then back up. My mother raised me to respect doctors, he said. But she also raised me to respect myself. Julian's hands clenched unconsciously. Your mother, she's a good woman? Leo's eyes softened for the first time. She's of everything. A silence settled between them, not empty, but full of things neither knew how to name. Then Leo said the sentence that broke Julian open. Are you my father? Julian's breath caught. There were 1,000 ways to answer, and every one of them felt like a betrayal. He could deny it, protect his career, protect his daughter, protect the neat life Claire curated. Or he could say yes and set fire to everything, maybe even set fire to Leo's peace. Julian opened his mouth, but Leo didn't wait. I don't want you to say it, Leo said quietly. Julian blinked. What? Leo took a slow breath, steadying himself. I don't want the answer from you. Not like this. Not while I'm in a hospital bed, surrounded by your power. Julian's voice cracked. Leo, Leo shook his head, firm. Listen. Julian fell silent. Leo's gaze didn't carry anger. It carried something harder, clarity. I'm not your redemption story, Leo said. I'm not a mistake you fix with money or a confession. Julian's eyes stung. No. You're Leo cut in gently. I'm the result of my mother's love. That's what I am. He swallowed. Whatever happened 20 years ago, she survived it. She built a life. She didn't raise me to chase a last name. Julian's shoulders sagged. Your blood, it's the same as mine. Leo nodded. Maybe. And that's biology. He leaned forward slightly, voice still calm but stronger now. But being a father isn't blood. If it were, you would have been one a long time ago. Julian flinched. The words were clean, not cruel. That somehow made them cut deeper. Leo's eyes glistened faintly, but he didn't let the tears fall. I don't want to be fought over, he said. I don't want your wife offering my mom contracts. I don't want you losing your career for me. Julian whispered, I'm willing to. Leo shook his head again. That's the problem. It still makes it about you. Julian stared at him, helpless. Leo exhaled and sat back, as if he'd finally said the thing he needed to say to breathe. Here's what I want, Leo said. I want you to stop. I want you to transfer my care to someone else. I want my medical file to stay medical. No more searches. No more favors. No more heroic sacrifices that come with strings. Julian's voice was barely audible. And after, Leo's gaze held his, steady as a verdict. After Leo said, you go back to your life, and I go back to mine. Julian's eyes shone now. You think you can just walk away from this? Leo's expression softened, and in that softness was something like mercy. I've been walking away from missing pieces my whole life, Leo said. I'm good at it. Julian stared at him, the weight of those words sinking deeper than any legal threat Claire could ever make. Because Leo wasn't demanding recognition. He wasn't begging. He was choosing himself. And that choice, quiet, proud, and buoyable, unraveled every calculation Claire had made. Outside the room, footsteps approached. A nurse's voice called softly, Dr. Vane. Your wife is online too. Julian looked at Leo. Leo nodded once, almost kindly. Go, he said. Answer her. Julian turned toward the door, his heart splitting in slow motion. And as he stepped into the hallway, he realized the twist wasn't that Leo was his son. The twist was that Leo didn't want to be claimed. He wanted to be free. The hospital boardroom smelled like polished wood and expensive certainty. A long oval table, bottled water aligned like soldiers. A projector humming softly, ready to turn someone's life into bullet points. Behind the glass wall, Boston's winter light washed the skyline in pale gray, as if even the city wanted to avoid looking directly at what was about to happen. Julian Vane stood at the far end of the room, hands clasped behind his back. Not to look confident, to keep them from shaking. Across from him sat the people who had elevated him, Trustees, department heads, compliance officers, a PR director with a tight smile, and an ethics chair whose eyes had seen to many exceptions become scandals. Claire arrived last. She didn't rush. She didn't apologize. She slid into her seat with the ease of someone who already knew how the vote would go. She met Julian's gaze just unsheen. Her expression said, "Remember the deal?" The chair cleared his throat. "Dr. Vane, thank you for coming in. Well, be direct." A screen lit up. Case summary: Leo trauma admission event, rare blood override flag, unjustified MR access. Julian's stomach tightened. The compliance officer spoke next. "Your transfusion decision was medically sound. The issue is not your clinical judgment." He clicked the remote. A timestamp appeared, stark and undeniable. 6:14 and record access unspecified purpose. The ethics chair leaned forward. "We need to understand why you accessed this patient's file outside of documented necessity." Julian opened his mouth, then closed it again, because if he lied, he might keep his job but he'd lose whatever remained of his integrity. And because Leo's voice still echoed in his chest, "Don't make it about you." Claire's fingers rested lightly on her folder. "Calm. Waiting." The PR director smiled politely. "For context, Dr. Vane, the media is interested in your donation. If this becomes a privacy matter, we will need a consistent narrative." A narrative. Julian almost laughed at the word. Almost. He looked down at the water bottle in front of him. The label was smooth, perfect like everything in this room. He imagined Elena's shop, an even floor, loud bell, stitches holding a life together. Then he imagined Leo's Fisiwake, clear-eyed, refusing to be bought or claimed. Julian lifted his gaze. "I accessed the record," he said quietly, "because I suspected a personal connection." Silence snapped into place, immediate and heavy. The ethics chair's eyes narrowed. "What kind of personal connection?" Julian felt Claire's stare like a blade between his shoulder blades. He could still stop. He could still retreat into ambiguity. But something had changed inside him. "I believe Leo is my biological son," Julian said. One trustee inhaled sharply. The PR director's smile collapsed. The compliance officer's pen stopped moving. Claire didn't move at all. Only her eyes shifted just slightly, as if she were watching a door close that she had never imagined could be opened. The ethics chair spoke slowly. "Are you stating you accessed the record to confirm paternity?" Julian's throat tightened. "I didn't order any testing." "I didn't, but you accessed it," the compliance officer pressed. "Without consent. Without medical justification in the note. That is a serious breach." Julian nodded once, accepting it the way a surgeon accepts a fatal diagnosis. "Yes," he said. "It is." A trustee leaned back. "Dr. Vane, you understand the implications." "I do," Julian replied. "And I understand that everything I've built here may end today." The PR director jumped in, voice urgent. "We can manage this if you deny the personal connection. If you clarify you were only reviewing transfusion protocols." Julian turned toward her. His voice remained calm, but it carried a finality that silenced the room. "I won't lie," he said. Claire's jaw tightened. Julian continued, looking at the board as if he were looking into a mirror he couldn't break. "I'm stepping down as medical director," he said. "Effective immediately. I will cooperate fully with compliance review. If the hospital determines disciplinary action is necessary, I will accept it." The chair stared at him. "You're resigning?" Julian nodded. "Yes." "And why?" the trustee asked, skepticism sharp. "Would you do that?" Julian's answer came quietly, but it landed harder than any legal argument. "Because I've spent 20 years choosing the safe option," he said. "And it cost someone else everything." Claire finally spoke, voice controlled but edged. "Julian," he didn't look at her. He looked down the table at the people who had praised him as a hero only days ago. "I saved a patient," Julian said. "But I harmed the boundaries that protect patients. If I can't honor those boundaries, I don't deserve this position." The compliance officer exhaled slowly, as if witnessing something rare, accountability that wasn't negotiated. The PR director whispered, "This will become public?" Julian nodded. "Then let it." He stood, pushing his chair back. Claire remained seated, frozen in a kind of disbelief that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with losing control. Her legal logic had been airtight, her leverage perfect, and yet it had failed because it had underestimated one thing no contract could bind: a human conscience. As Julian walked out of the boardroom, his phone was in his pocket. A message from an unknown number. Only 3 words: "Leo wants you." Julian stopped in the hallway, heart hammering it with fear now, but with something almost unbearable. Because sacrifice, he realized, wasn't quitting a title. Sacrifice was stepping into the truth, knowing it would change everyone's life. And doing it anyway. The parking lot behind Elena's alterations shop was empty except for a thin crust of snow and the sound of a distant bus shilling at the curb. Julian stood beside his car for a long moment, staring at the shop's back door like it might open and swallow him whole. He no longer had a title that could protect him. No board seat. No polished authority. No carefully framed identity. Only a man, a mistake that had matured into consequence, and the fragile possibility of doing one honest thing before the rest of his life calcified into regret. When the door finally opened, Elena didn't invite him in. She stepped out instead, closing it behind her as if to keep the warmth inside, because warmth was something she had learned to guard. "You resigned," she said. Julian nodded. "It's public now. It'll spread." Elena studied him, eyes narrowing. "And you did that for him?" Julian's voice was quiet. "I did it because it was mine to carry." Elena didn't soften. "Your wife will come for me?" Julian's mouth tightened. "I know." As if summoned by the sentence, a car rolled slowly into the lot, sleek, black, out of place among the battered sedans. It stopped with deliberate precision. Claire stepped out. She wasn't dressed for court or television. No armor of glamour. Just a simple coat, hair pulled back, face composed in a way that suggested exhaustion had finally found a crack in her. Elena's shoulders squared. "So you followed him?" Claire's gaze moved from Elena to Julian, then back. "No," she said. "I anticipated." Elena's laugh was low. "Of course you did." Claire didn't respond to the jab. Instead, she reached into her handbag and pulled out an envelope, thick, official, heavy with intent. She held it out toward Elena, not like a gift, but like a final exhibit. "The NDA offer remains," Claire said. $5 million? It can be wired today." Elena stared at the envelope. Her expression didn't change, but her voice did quiet deadly. "Do you know what's funny?" Elena asked. "Your money always arrives when your conscience doesn't." Claire's jaw tightened slightly. "This isn't about conscience. It's about containment." Elena took the envelope. Julian's heart lurched until Elena did something Claire clearly hadn't prepared for. Elena walked to the metal trash can by the back door, flipped the lid open, and dropped the envelope inside. Then she struck a match. The flame caught quickly, licking the paper's edge, curling the corners into black petals. A faint, bitter smell rose, ink and pride burning together. Claire's face went still. Elena watched the envelope burn without blinking. "There," she said softly. "No, you can't pretend this was generosity." Julian stared, stunned, not by the fire, but by the clarity of it. Elena wasn't rejecting money. She was rejecting the idea that their lives could be negotiated. Claire's voice came out controlled but strained. "You're making a mistake." Elena turned to her. "No, I made my mistake 20 years ago. Thinking your family's approval mattered." A beat of silence. Then Julian spoke, voice low. "Claire, it's over." Claire's eyes snapped to him. "Over?" Julian nodded. "We're done? Not because of Leo. Because I finally see what we became." Claire's composure flickered just once. "You're choosing her." Julian shook his head. "I'm choosing truth." He reached into his coat and pulled out a second document, then simple. Nothing like Claire's contracts. "A trust," he said. "An education fund for Leo. Managed by an independent trustee. No control from me. No strings." Elena's eyes narrowed, suspicious. "Why?" Julian's throat tightened. "Because I can't buy him. I can't claim him like a trophy. But I can make sure the door to his future isn't locked because of my absence." He held the paper out to Elena, but toward the space between them, as if offering it to the past itself. Elena didn't take it immediately. She looked at Julian for a long time, searching for the familiar cowardice. Then she said, quietly, "He decides what he wants. Not you?" Julian nodded. I know. Claire stared at the burning remains in the trash can, the smoke rising into winter air. Her voice dropped, brittle. So that's it, she said. You destroy your career, you abandon your marriage, and you think this ends neatly. Julian met her gaze. Nothing ends neatly. Claire's eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. The Queen of Law would not cry in a parking lot. She straightened, reclaiming posture like a shield. You'll move forward with separation, she said, voice flat. For our daughter's stability. Julian nodded once. Whatever protects her. Claire held his gaze, something unspoken passing between them, a recognition that two people could share a life and still fail to share a soul. Then she turned and walked back to her car, heels crunching softly on snow, each step an acceptance she would never name as grief. Elena exhaled as if releasing a long-held breath. Leo is at the park, she said, nodding toward the street. He wanted air. Julian's chest tightened. He asked for me? Elena's eyes softened just a fraction. He asked to talk, like two people, not like a rescue, not like a reunion. Julian swallowed. Oh, okay. The park bench was cold, the wood dark with winter moisture. Leo sat with his hands in his pockets, shoulders hunched slightly against the wind. He didn't stand when Julian approached. Julian stopped a few feet away. Hey! Leo looked up. His gaze was steady and readable. You resigned, Leo said. Julian nodded. Yeah. Leo was quiet for a moment, then asked the one question that sounded simple and wasn't. Do you regret it? Julian sat on the other end of the bench, leaving space between them like respect. He looked out at the bare trees, the gray sky, the ordinary people walking dogs, and pushing strollers, lives that didn't need to be perfect to be real. I regret 20 years, Julian said. Not today. Leo's jaw tightened slightly, then eased. My blood type, he said, shifting to something safer. It's going to be a problem, isn't it? Julian glanced at him, almost smiling through the ache. It's going to be rare, he said. It's going to require planning, but it's manageable. Leo nodded slowly, absorbing the information like a man building his own map. After a moment, he said quietly, so what now? Julian looked at him, really looked. Not as a miracle patient, not as a scandal, not as an error, as a person. Now, Julian said, voice gentle, we talk about blood, about health, about anything you want. Leo's eyes softened just a little. Like friends? He asked. Julian nodded, like people who start late. Leo stared ahead, then gave the smallest, almost reluctant smile. Okay, he said. And in that simple word no forgiveness promised, no family title demanded, something new began. Not a fairy tale. A dawn? A beginning built without money, without leverage, without hatred, just to live, finally speaking in the same honest air. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with clarity. This story reminds us that integrity is rarely convenient and almost never painless. Julian didn't lose his career because he made a medical mistake. He lost it because, for the first time, he chose truth over protection, responsibility over reputation. And Leo didn't win a father. He chose something far more difficult, self-respect over inheritance, identity over entitlement. Being a parent, a professional, or a good humanist about biology titles or contracts. It's about when you stop hiding behind systems designed to protect you and start accepting the consequences of who you've been. Claire believed order could be preserved with logic and leverage. Julian believed redemption could be earned through sacrifice. Leo showed them both something deeper. You cannot repair the past by controlling the future. You can only face it and let others choose freely what comes next. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't reunite families. Sometimes it doesn't fix marriages. Sometimes it doesn't even bring forgiveness. But it gives something rarer, a life that no longer depends on us to stand upright. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed how you saw someone you trusted? If telling the truth meant losing status, security, or approval, would you still choose it? Do you believe people can start over without erasing the harm they caused? We invite you to share. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to share your own experience. A moment when honesty cost you something. Or when silence costs you more. You can leave a comment below or share anonymously if you prefer. Your story may help someone else find the courage to choose truth, especially when it's hard, because sometimes the most powerful legacy we leave behind isn't what we protect, but what we finally have the courage to face.